In pro wrestling, you've got your villains, and then you've got your monsters. Guys who didn't just break the rules, but seemed to live in a world without them. And back in the 60s and 70s, nobody embodied that pure, unfiltered chaos better than Maurice Mad Dog Vachon. His eyes were wide and wild. His voice was a gravelly snarl that felt like sandpaper on your ears. His attacks were a storm of biting, brawling, and bloodshed that left a trail of wrestling's greatest heroes in his wake. To the fans of the American Wrestling Association, he was a walking nightmare, a force of nature that terrorized the Midwest for the better part of 2 decades. His pile driver was so dangerous it was eventually banned in multiple states. His feuds were the stuff of blood-soaked legend. For most people, that's where the story of Mad Dog's terror begins and ends. It was all an act, right? A performance of savagery that just happened to make him the most hated man in the sport. But what if I told you that was only half the story? What if the real reason Vachon was the most feared man in the AWA had less to do with what happened in front of the cameras, and more to do with a quiet power play behind the scenes that most fans never knew about? A power play rooted not in his fists, but in his unique ability to hold the entire promotion in the palm of his hand. This is the story of how a 5'7" monster from Montreal became the secret king of the AWA. Before the Mad Dog, there was just Maurice. Born in a working-class part of Montreal in 1929, Joseph Maurice Régis Vachon was one of 13 children. From a young age, he was a seriously gifted athlete. But he found his calling not in some back-alley brawl, but in the disciplined world of amateur wrestling. He was a natural, a grappling prodigy who trained relentlessly. His talent was so obvious that it landed him a spot on the Canadian Olympic team for the 1948 Games in London, where he finished a respectable 7th. And it was there, among the world's best, that he first crossed paths with another standout amateur from the US, a young man named Verne Gagne. After the Olympics, Vachon kept winning, even grabbing a gold medal at the 1950 British Empire Games. The jump to the paid ranks of professional wrestling seemed like the next logical step. But for Maurice Vachon, the early years were a struggle. He was a skilled technical wrestler, sure, but in the colorful, character-driven world of the 1950s, skill alone wasn't cutting it. He was just another face in the crowd, a talented but forgettable grappler trying to find his hook. For nearly a decade, his career just stalled. He was good, but he wasn't a star. The frustration was building, and as Greg Gagne later recalled, Vachon was on the verge of quitting wrestling for good. Then, one night in Portland, Oregon, everything changed. Fed up and desperate, Vachon just let loose in the ring, throwing his opponent over the top rope with so much force he reportedly injured fans in the front row. When he got to the back, the promoter, Don Owen, allegedly told him he acted like a mad dog. A switch flipped. The clean-cut Olympian was gone. In his place stood a monster. Vachon shaved his head, grew a mangy beard, and leaned hard into the new name. He had finally found his character, or maybe his character had finally found him. The transformation was total. Mad Dog Vachon wrestled with a ferocity that was just plain shocking for the time. He wasn't there to out-wrestle you. He was there to maim you. He'd gnaw and bite at his opponent's foreheads, leaving them bloody messes. He'd use any object he could get his hands on. And then there was the pile driver. Vachon's pile driver wasn't just a finisher, it was a threat, a move he delivered with such vicious intent that he was eventually banned from competing in 3 states. This wasn't just a performance anymore. This was a calculated campaign of terror. Vachon had created a persona so genuinely frightening that the line between the man and the monster started to blur. Not just for the fans, but for the other wrestlers too. He had laid the foundation of fear. To get why Vachon ended up with so much behind-the-scenes power, you have to understand the kingdom he was about to invade, the American Wrestling Association. By the early 1960s, the AWA was the top promotion in the Midwest, an empire built in the image of its owner and biggest star, Verne Gagne, the same guy Vachon had met at the Olympics years earlier. Gagne was the all-American hero, a former NCAA champion, a handsome, clean-cut family man. His style was scientific, athletic, and honorable. He was everything a hero was supposed to be. But every hero needs a villain. Every shining knight needs a dragon. For all his popularity, Gagne couldn't just wrestle other good guys. The entire business model of wrestling is built on conflict, on that irresistible urge to see good stomp out evil. The AWA needed a monster. So in 1962, Verne Gagne recruited the most terrifying one he could find. When Mad Dog Vachon exploded into the AWA, it was like a grenade tossed into a church. He was the exact opposite of everything Verne Gagne and his promotion stood for. Where Gagne was a technical master, Vachon was a wild brawler. Where Gagne represented sportsmanship, Vachon spit on the rulebook before tearing it to shreds. The clash was instant and electric. Fans who adored Gagne's clean-cut heroism were absolutely disgusted by Vachon's sadism. They hated him with a passion promoters dream of. The way Vachon built that fear was just flawless. It started with the look, the bald head, the demonic beard, the stocky, pit bull-like frame. Then came the voice, a low, guttural growl that sounded like it was dredged up from a sewer. His interviews were legendary, unhinged, intense, and scarily believable. He promised to maim, to hospitalize, to end careers, and when you looked into his eyes, you believed him. His unpredictability was his trademark. In a world of choreographed action, Vachon felt genuinely out of control. Even his fellow wrestlers were wary. Verne Gagne himself would later call Vachon the single most unpredictable man he ever faced. Greg Gagne said he was never afraid to get in the ring with anyone, except Mad Dog Vachon. He remembered his father, Verne, coming home covered in scratches and bite marks, a real-world souvenir from facing the Mad Dog. Vachon wasn't just playing a character, he was the chaos that threatened Gagne's order. He was the darkness that made Gagne's light shine brighter. He was, simply, the perfect villain. He became one of the AWA's biggest box office draws almost overnight, with fans packing arenas for one reason: to see someone, anyone, finally shut the Mad Dog up. But that universal hatred? That would become the source of his power. This is where the story turns. This is where we go from the in-ring brutality to the backroom politics. To understand what happened next, you have to remember one crucial thing. Verne Gagne wasn't just the AWA's top hero. He was the owner and the booker, the man who decided who won and who lost. The AWA World Heavyweight Championship was his title. And on May 2nd, 1964, the unthinkable happened. Mad Dog Vachon pinned Verne Gagne and became the AWA World Heavyweight Champion. Fans were stunned. The monster had actually done it. Now, in wrestling, a shocking title change to a top heel is usually a short-term thing, designed to set up the hero's triumphant comeback. And sure enough, Gagne won the title back just 2 weeks later. Order was restored. The story should have ended there, but it didn't. On October 20th, 1964, Mad Dog Vachon did it again, beating Gagne for his second AWA World title. This wasn't a fluke anymore. It was a statement. Over the next 3 years, Mad Dog Vachon would become a 5-time AWA World Heavyweight Champion, trading the belt with Gagne, the Crusher, and Dick the Bruiser. His final reign was ended, poetically, by his nemesis Gagne on February 26, 1967. So, ask yourself, why? Why would Verne Gagne, a promoter who famously preferred credible, technical champions, repeatedly put his company's top prize on a man who was the complete opposite of his wrestling philosophy? The answer has nothing to do with wrestling and everything to do with business. Vachon's power wasn't blackmail or shady backroom deals. His power came directly from the audience. Vachon had become so good at being a monster that he was basically a license to print money. The WWE itself notes that he drew some of the biggest box offices the territory had ever seen. Fans didn't pay to see Mad Dog win. They paid, in huge numbers, for the chance to see him lose. They paid to see Verne Gagne or the Crusher or anyone finally shut him down. This is the hidden genius of Vachon's power. He made himself indispensable. Gagne, the promoter, needed him. He needed the money Vachon brought in. He needed the raw, emotional reaction Vachon could get from a crowd. In a very real way, Vachon's ability to create fear gave him leverage over his own boss. Gagne couldn't afford to bury him or keep the title off him for too long, because that would mean killing the golden goose, or in this case, the rabid dog. Every time Vachon won the AWA title, it wasn't just a story beat. It was a business decision. It was an admission from the owner of the company that this 5'7" agent of chaos was simply too valuable to keep out of the main event. His political power wasn't won by politicking. It was won every night in the ring, with every drop of blood and every terrified scream from the crowd. He held the promotion's success hostage with his own monstrous charisma. He wasn't just another wrestler. He was a pillar of the AWA's financial success, and that gave him more power than almost anyone else on the roster. This dynamic, where a wrestler's drawing power basically dictates their spot in the company, is one of the most fascinating parts of wrestling. It's the real story behind the scripted one. If you're digging this peek behind the curtain of the AWA, do me a favor and hit that like button. And if you want more stories about the hidden politics of pro wrestling, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. Mad Dog's influence didn't stop with his 5 runs as world champion. As the 60s ended, his reign of terror expanded. His savagery was about to be doubled. He formed a tag team with his real-life brother, Paul Vachon, who took on the equally scary name, The Butcher. Together, the Vachon brothers were a tag team nightmare. If one Mad Dog was terrifying, 2 Vachons were apocalyptic for the heroes of the AWA. They brought their signature brand of brutality to the tag team division, and in 1969, they defeated the legendary duo of The Crusher and Dick the Bruiser to win the AWA World Tag Team Championship. This wasn't just another title win. The Crusher and the Bruiser were icons. For the Vachons to beat them for the belts was a huge deal. And they didn't just win the belts, they held them for more than 2 years, dominating the division and fending off every heroic team the AWA had. This proved that Vachon's fear factor was transferable. He could terrorize the main event scene by himself or dominate the tag ranks with his brother. The family's grip on the AWA got even tighter when their sister, Vivienne Vachon, entered the women's division. An intimidating wrestler in her own right, Vivienne captured the AWA women's title in 1971. Suddenly, the Vachons were a dynasty, a terrifying family holding gold across multiple divisions. Their name became synonymous with pure evil in the AWA. This wasn't just a wrestler on a hot streak, this was a family establishing a stranglehold on an entire promotion, all built on the foundation of fear that Maurice had perfected. For nearly 2 decades, Mad Dog Vachon was the definition of evil in pro wrestling. He was the monster under the bed for a whole generation of fans. So what happens when that monster suddenly becomes the hero? In the late 1970s, the AWA decided to find out. In one of the most unlikely character shifts in wrestling history, Mad Dog Vachon slowly turned from the most hated man in the territory to one of its most beloved heroes. The whole thing was kicked off, fittingly, by his oldest rival. The story went that Verne Gagne, after getting beaten down by a new wave of villains like Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens, needed a partner he could trust. In a moment of desperation, he turned to the one man he knew was tough enough to have his back, Mad Dog Vachon. It took some convincing, but Vachon finally, and reluctantly, agreed to team with his arch nemesis. Fans were skeptical at first, but the turn worked brilliantly. And the reason it worked was because of the very fear Vachon had spent 20 years building. The audience had a deep, almost primal respect for his toughness. They had seen him go to war with every hero they'd ever cheered for. They knew, without a doubt, that he was one of the toughest men on the planet. Seeing that legendary toughness finally aimed at the bad guys was an incredible thrill. The same wild energy that once got garbage thrown at him now drew massive cheers. By the time he had a final run in the WWE in 1984, he was a universally beloved legend, a testament to how deep his character work truly was. So, what was the real reason Mad Dog Vachon was the most feared man in the AWA? Well, the answer really has two parts. In the ring, it was his shocking, believable brutality that made him a legitimate threat to anyone he faced. But the real fear he commanded wasn't in the ring at all. It was in the front office. It was a political fear, born from undeniable drawing power. Verne Gagne, the promoter, had to fear Vachon's absence more than he disliked his style. He had to put his company's top prize on his polar opposite 5 separate times because Vachon's brand of terror was simply too good for business. That is the ultimate power in wrestling. To be so good at being hated that the people in charge have no choice but to push you to the top. Vachon's legacy isn't just in the wild wrestlers he inspired, like Bruiser Brody or his own niece Luna. It's not just his Hall of Fame ring. His true legacy is the story of how a 5'7" monster from Montreal conquered a wrestling empire, not just with his fists, but with the fear and fascination he commanded from an entire generation. What's your favorite Mad Dog Vachon moment? Do you remember his legendary feuds in the AWA? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below.